Far from the Madding Crowd is Thomas Hardy's fourth novel, originally published in 1874 as a serial for Cornhill magazine. Hardy was a Victorian poet and novelist writing in the realist tradition. The novel is the first to be set in Hardy's Wessex, a fictitious region of England modelled after his own Dorset and named after the early Saxon kingdom in the same region. Like much of Hardy's work, the novel explores rural, Victorian-era English society and counters its traditional, idyllic portrayal with a rougher, more complicated depiction. Gabriel Oak is a young shepherd. With the savings of a frugal life, and alone, he has leased and stocked a farm. He falls in love with a newcomer 8 years his junior, Bathsheba Everdeen, a proud beauty who arrives to live with her aunt. Over time, Bathsheba and Gabriel grow to like each other well enough, and Bathsheba even saves his life once. However, when he makes her an unadorned offer of marriage, she refuses. She values her independence too much and him too little. After a few days, she moves to Weatherbury, a village some miles off. When they next meet, their circumstances have changed drastically. An inexperienced new sheepdog has driven Gabriel's flock over a cliff, ruining him. After selling off everything of value, he manages to settle all his debts but emerges penniless. He seeks employment at a hiring fair in the town of Casterbridge. When he finds none, he heads to another such fair in Shottsford, a town about 10 miles from Weatherbury. On the way, he happens upon a dangerous fire on a farm and leads the bystanders in putting it out. When the veiled owner comes to thank him, he asks if she needs a shepherd. She uncovers her face and reveals herself to be none other than Bathsheba. She has recently inherited her uncle's estate and is now wealthy. Though somewhat uncomfortable, she employs him. Meanwhile, Bathsheba gains a new admirer. William Boldwood is a prosperous farmer of about 40, whose ardor Bathsheba unwittingly awakens when she playfully sends him a valentine sealed with red wax on which she has embossed the words, "Marry me." Boldwood, not realizing the valentine was a jest, becomes obsessed with her and soon proposes marriage assuming she wanted the same. Although she does not love him, she toys with the idea of accepting his offer. He is the most eligible bachelor in the district. However, she avoids giving him a definite answer. When Gabriel rebukes her for her thoughtlessness regarding Boldwood, she dismisses him from his job. When Bathsheba's sheep begin dying from bloat, she discovers to her chagrin that Gabriel is the only man who knows how to cure them. Her pride delays the inevitable, but finally she is forced to beg him for help. Afterward, she offers him back his job, and their friendship is restored. At this point, the dashing Sergeant Frank Troy returns to his native Weatherbury and by chance encounters Bathsheba one night. Her initial dislike turns to infatuation after he excites her with a private display of swordsmanship. Gabriel observes Bathsheba's interest in the young soldier and tries to discourage it, telling her she would be better off marrying Boldwood. Boldwood becomes aggressive towards Troy, and Bathsheba goes to Bath to prevent Troy returning to Weatherbury, as she fears what might happen if Troy encountered Boldwood. On their return, Boldwood offers his rival a large bribe to give up Bathsheba. Troy pretends to consider the offer, then scornfully announces they are already married. Boldwood withdraws, humiliated, and vows revenge. Bathsheba soon discovers that her new husband is an improvident gambler with little interest in farming. Worse, she begins to suspect he doesn't love her. In fact, Troy's heart belongs to her former servant, Fanny Robin. Before meeting Bathsheba, Troy had promised to marry Fanny. On the wedding day, however, the luckless girl went to the wrong church. She explained her mistake, but Troy, humiliated at being left at the altar, angrily called off the wedding. When they parted, unbeknownst to Troy, Fanny was pregnant with his child. Some months later, Troy and Bathsheba encounter Fanny on the road, destitute, as she painfully makes her way toward the Casterbridge workhouse. Troy sends his wife onward, then gives Fanny all the money in his pocket, telling her he will give her more in a few days. Fanny uses up the last of her strength to reach her destination. A few hours later, she dies in childbirth, along with the baby. Mother and child are then placed in a coffin and sent home to Weatherbury for interment. Gabriel, who knows of Troy's relationship with Fanny, tries to conceal the child's existence, but Bathsheba agrees that the coffin can be left in her house overnight. From her sense of duty towards a former servant, her servant and confidant, Liddy, repeats the rumor that Fanny had a child. When all the servants are in bed, Bathsheba unscrews the lid and sees the two bodies inside. Troy then comes home from Casterbridge, where he had gone to keep his appointment with Fanny. Seeing the reason for her failure to meet him, he gently kisses the corpse and tells the anguished Bathsheba, "This woman is more to me, dead as she is, than ever you were, or are, or can be." The next day he spends all his money on a marble tombstone with the inscription, "Erected by Francis Troy in beloved memory of Fanny Robin." Then, loathing himself and unable to bear Bathsheba's company, he leaves. After a long walk, he bathes in the sea, leaving his clothes on the beach. A strong current carries him away, but he is rescued by a rowing boat. He does not return home, however. A year later, with Troy presumed drowned, Boldwood renews his suit. Burdened with guilt over the pain she has caused him, Bathsheba reluctantly consents to marry him in 6 years, long enough to have Troy declared dead. Boldwood begins counting the days. Troy tires of his hand-to-mouth existence as a traveling actor and considers reclaiming his position and wife. He returns to Weatherbury on Christmas Eve and goes to Boldwood's house, where a party is underway. He orders Bathsheba to come with him. When she shrinks back in shock and dismay, he seizes her arm, and she screams. At this, Boldwood shoots Troy dead and tries unsuccessfully to turn the double-barreled gun on himself. Although Boldwood is convicted of murder and sentenced to be hanged, his friends petition the Home Secretary for mercy, claiming insanity. This is granted, and Boldwood's sentence is commuted to confinement during Her Majesty's pleasure. Bathsheba buries her husband in the same grave as Fanny Robin and their child. Throughout her tribulations, Bathsheba comes to rely increasingly on her oldest and, as she admits to herself, only real friend, Gabriel. When he gives notice that he is leaving her employ, she realizes how important he has become to her well-being. That night, she goes alone to visit him in his cottage, to find out why he is deserting her. Pressed, he reluctantly reveals that it is because people have been gossiping that he wants to marry her. She exclaims that it is too absurd, too soon, to think of, by far. He bitterly agrees that it is absurd, but when she corrects him, saying that it is only too soon, he is emboldened to ask once again for her hand in marriage. She accepts, and the two are quietly married. The title of Far from the Madding Crowd is taken from an 18th-century poem by Thomas Gray, Elegy on a Country Churchyard, but it cuts off the rest of the line, which in its entirety reads, "Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife." While the idea of the bucolic countryside as being free of the strife of the crowd is one way to characterize country life, Hardy's title is ironic. Rather than depicting stereotypes of pastoral calm, his novel uses those images as a jumping-off point to portray a landscape that's actually riddled with conflict. Its characters must battle against the dangerous and often overpowering laws of nature and its creatures, even while the characters themselves become subject to conflicts among each other that mirror the difficulties of the natural world. Indeed, nature seems often to fly in the face of people's desires and plans. The disaster of Gabriel Oak's sheep is the novel's first dramatic instance of this. While Gabriel has spent years and all his resources developing the flock, one unlucky event kills them all and immediately transforms his circumstances. Later, though, Gabriel seems better equipped to handle the vicissitudes of natural disaster. He meets Bathsheba again after putting out a fire in Weatherbury, and he saves a group of lambs from being poisoned by Clover, two instances of Gabriel's newfound ability to navigate the danger of the natural world. Troy is the opposite case. He is used to managing his own affairs adeptly, but after Fanny's death, and after a storm washes away the flowers he's planted at her grave, he rages against cold natural laws and uncontrollable circumstances rather than learning to work within them. Bathsheba, meanwhile, also learns to navigate as best she can in a hostile natural environment. For her, Troy eventually becomes yet another conflict-ridden aspect of this environment. After their wedding, for instance, he plies Bathsheba's workers with alcohol. As a result, no one except Gabriel is around to keep the hay safe from an incoming storm, and Gabriel and Bathsheba have to race against time and nature to ensure that all is not lost. Humans, then, can work to mitigate conflicts within nature, can rebel, unsuccessfully, against it, or can become hostile forces of their own. Whichever the case, the novel makes clear that country life is not exempt from such conflicts. And while humans manage natural forces as best they can, there is little they can do to halt forces outside their control. Fate, chance, and circumstance, then, rule Hardy's rural world. Far from the madding crowd, the natural environment, the forests and fields, the pastures and livestock, the drops of dew and the rays of the sun, all provide a rich tapestry onto which Hardy projects his story. The language reflects the sentiments and psychologies of the characters. His language is exquisite and is simply a pleasure to read.